A man with nothing but loneliness, a woman dreaming of escape, and one letter that brings them together across thousands of miles. But can hope survive in a land filled with danger and uncertainty? Hope can begin with something as small as a single step or a single letter. If you believe in stories like this, please subscribe to support the channel. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.
I still see Sam Whitaker's face from that first day, the raw hope warring with despair. For 3 solid months, he'd make that long ride from his ranch. His shoulders slumped just to ask for mail I knew hadn't come. I'd seen his notice in the paper, bless his heart, a lonely man casting a line into the dark. It felt like a crime, watching a good man waste away from sheer solitude, and I felt a pang of uselessness just shaking my head at him day after day. The morning he came in looking like he was ready to call it quits for good, that's when it was there. A single cream-colored envelope in his box. Sam just stood there, that letter trembling in his work-roughened hands. I tried to sound casual. "That showed up late yesterday," I said. "Figured you'd be along." He couldn't even speak, just stared at the return address. Miss Ella Thompson, 447 Chestnut Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He'd been right on the edge of giving up. I saw it in his eyes, the belief that putting that ad out there was a fool's errand. "You gonna open it or just burn a hole in it with that stare?" I nudged. "Don't know," he mumbled, his voice all gravel. "What if it's some kind of cruel joke?" "Ain't but one way to find out," I told him. His thumb finally broke the seal. He started reading right there in the middle of my post office, and I made myself busy sorting letters, though my eyes never really left him. I wasn't just watching him read. I was watching a man's spirit flicker back to life. "She writes real proper," was all he whispered. I leaned in a bit. "What'd she say, son?" But he was lost in her words. A seamstress named Ella Thompson, 24 years old, feeling just as fenced in by all those gray buildings as he was by all this open space. She lived in a world of brick and routine, but then she asked a question that made Sam look up at me, his eyes shining with a light I hadn't seen in years. "I confess I have always dreamed of wide spaces and clear skies," he read aloud. "Is it true you can see stars so bright they seem close enough to touch?" "She wants to know about the stars," he said, his voice thick with something like reverence. It was then I knew this was real. A seed of hope had just found fertile ground. "Well, then, you'd best get to writing and tell her all about 'em." He rode out of town like his saddle was on fire, that letter tucked inside his shirt like a holy relic. The 12 miles back to his cabin probably felt like 1,000. I could picture him now, tearing his place apart, looking for decent paper, trying to get his hand steady enough to answer a question that mattered more than he knew. He was back before sunup, pressing an envelope into my hands that was thick enough to be a book. 6 pages he'd written front and back until the lamp ran dry. He paid extra to have it sent the fastest way possible. At the end of it all, he told me he'd written, "The stars here, Miss Thompson, are so bright they look like the whole sky's on fire. I'd sure like to tell you more if you'll let me write again." I couldn't help but grin. "You've got it bad already." "I ain't got nothing yet," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. "Just hope. Sometimes that's more than enough to start with," I told him. The waitin' nearly did him in. He wore himself to a frazzle, fixin' things that weren't broke and riding his property line till his horse was sick of the sight of him. Every day, a new excuse to come to town. Every day, I'd have to tell him, "Son, a letter to Philadelphia takes time. Then she's got to find time to write back. You're going to worry yourself into an early grave." "I can't help it," he'd say. "What if I said the wrong thing?" "You'll know soon enough." 3 weeks crawled by. I saw that old despair creeping back into his eyes. He'd decided she wasn't writing back, that a dusty rancher wasn't enough for a city girl. He was riding right past the post office one day, not even looking my way, when I saw it. I hollered out the door, "Sam, you get in here right now." His heart was pounding so hard I could nearly hear it when he saw the letter in my hand. He took it, hands shaking, and tore it open. It was thicker than the last one. He read for a moment, and then a slow breath escaped him, one he'd been holding for near a month. "Dear Sam," he read aloud. She called me Sam. Her own loneliness, she wrote, was just as vast in a crowded city as his was out here in the empty plains. His words were a light in her gray days, she said. I watched their whole world change right there across my counter. It became a rhythm for us all. Once a week, sometimes more, he'd bring me his life on paper, and in return, I'd hand him hers. He told her about the hard work, the rattlesnakes, and the quiet grief that had shaped him. And she told him about her own dreams, her own losses, and the way her needle and thread felt more like chains than tools. It was a strange and sacred thing, watching two people fall in love through letters I sorted and stamped myself. Then came the letter where she confessed to dreaming of just packing a bag and getting on a train, going somewhere new, somewhere she could breathe. "Is that foolish?" she asked. Sam scribbled a reply so fast his hand could barely keep up. "It's not foolish," he wrote. "The foolish thing is staying somewhere that makes your soul small." The letters started coming like clockwork after that. He was telling her things I reckon he'd never said out loud before. About the nights the silence was so loud he thought he might drown in it. "I guess that's why I put the ad in the paper," he confessed. "I just needed to know if there was one other person who understood what it felt like to be so alone. You forget how to talk." Her answer came quicker than ever. "I understand more than you know. Sam, your letters have woken something up in me. I hope you won't think less of me," she wrote, "but I find myself thinking about you all the time." I read that over his shoulder one day. He didn't mind by then. And I saw the look on his face. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. Like he was finding a piece of his own soul he didn't know was missing. It was the most natural thing in the world. He spent 2 days on his next reply. It was the thickest letter yet. He told her everything about his life, his ranch, his dreams for the future he'd almost given up on. He was laying his whole heart out on those pages. "Ella," he ended it, "I find myself wanting to tell you things." I took that letter from his hand and I could feel the weight of it. A storm was kicking up bad to the east, and I knew for a fact the mail train would be stopped for days. I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Without a word to him, I gave the letter and 2 of my own dollars to a private rider heading south to a clearer line. Sometimes a man's got to give fate a little nudge. I reckon honesty is the only real coin you've got when all that's between 2 souls is ink on a page. I saw him come for his mail every day, and I thought about her too. I'd watch him and imagine him wondering what her voice sounded like, what her smile looked like, what it would be to have her there. Was it crazy? For a man to pour his heart out to a ghost in a letter? He'd hand his letters to Henry at the post office, his hands always shaking a bit. "This one feels important," he'd say. And Henry would just nod. For 2 weeks, the waiting near about ate him alive. He looked like a man bracing for a storm, sure she'd tell him he was a fool. When her letter came, it was just a single thin page. My heart sank for him, thinking it was a goodbye. But the look on his face when he read it, well, I didn't need to read the words. I knew it wasn't madness. She felt it too. Every word he wrote had built a bridge from his heart in Arizona clear to hers in Philadelphia. And she was fixing to cross it. "She loves me, Martha," he'd said to me later, standing in my store like he'd seen a heavenly vision. I just stood there, speechless for a moment. I'd been one of the whisperers, Lord forgive me, thinking it was just a lonely man's folly. "Well," Henry had apparently told him with a grin, "I guess you better figure out what to do about that." Sam rode out of town in a trance that day. He spent that whole night planning. You could see it in his eyes the next morning. He had some money put by, not a fortune. But enough. He had that ranch, built with his own two hands. The only thing he didn't have was her. And suddenly, that was all that mattered in the whole wide world. It took him 3 whole days to write the next letter. I sold him the paper myself. He'd come in, buy a few sheets, then come back the next day for more, looking more haggard each time. He was trying to find just the right words to ask the biggest question of his life. He was trying to convince a woman he'd never seen to cross a country for him, to build a life on nothing but words and trust. "I am asking you to marry me." Those were the words I imagined he wrote, the ones that hung in the air between them for weeks. "I can't give you riches, but I can give you a home. Land that touches the sky, stars brighter than any city lights, and a man who will love you with his whole soul." That's what I hoped he promised her. He was asking for a leap of faith so big it made my own heart tremble just thinking on it. To leave all you know for a stranger's promises. But I saw in his eyes he believed it was a risk worth taking. After he sent that letter, the waiting was the hardest I'd ever seen on a man. A week dragged into 2. Sam worked himself into the ground, trying to outrun his own thoughts. But every time I saw him, he looked a little more haunted. The whole town was watching. We all figured he'd asked for too much, that he'd scared her off. 3 weeks passed, then 4. I started to lose hope for him, my own quiet guilt growing with every passing day for never offering a single word of comfort. He'd laid his heart bare, and we all figured he'd get it broken. I heard folks talk and snickering about the poor rancher proposing to his pen pal. Then one Tuesday, 6 weeks on, I saw Henry ride out toward Sam's place instead of waiting. My own heart gave a little jump. Something was up. Henry was holding an envelope. "Figured you'd want this sooner rather than later," he'd apparently told Sam. Sam came into my store later that afternoon, his hands trembling so bad he could barely hold the pages. The envelope was thick. He read it right there by the counter. "My dearest Sam," I imagined it said, "forgive my delay. I needed time to think, not because I doubt my feelings for you. My love is as sure as the sunrise, but because I am scared of leaving my whole world behind, scared of the long journey, scared that what we built in letters might crumble under the weight of real life, but I'm more scared of a life spent wondering what if. So yes, Sam, yes, I will come to Arizona. Yes, I will marry you. I'll leave Philadelphia in 3 weeks' time. The journey by train and stagecoach will take about 2 weeks. I'm bringing my mother's trunk, my sewing things, my books, and my whole heart. I trust you'll keep it safe. I love you, Sam Whitaker. Your Ella." Sam read that letter 3 times, his lips moving but no sound coming out. She was coming. That sweet, brave woman was coming all the way here to marry him. She said yes, he finally whispered, looking at me with stunned eyes. "I could tell by the look on your face," Henry had said. "Best get busy, son. You've got about 3 weeks to get ready for a bride." Sam just looked around as if seeing his own rough life for the first time. His dusty boots, his solitary world. 3 weeks to make a home worthy of a love like that. 3 weeks, he breathed. "Henry, what in the world have I done?" And Henry, God bless him, had said, "You've gone and given yourself a future, son. Now you best be ready for it." Henry rode off, and I watched Sam stand there, clutching that letter to his chest, looking terrified and reborn all at once. After all those months of just words, he was about to meet the woman who'd changed his everything. The very next morning, he was in my general store before I'd even finished my coffee. "Martha, I need to buy everything," he said, the words spilling out. "Furniture, curtains, dishes, whatever a woman needs to make a home." I raised my eyebrows at him. "Sam Whitaker, are you telling me what I think you are?" She said yes, he grinned, and it was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. "She's coming in 3 weeks, give or take." "Well, I'll be," I said, a real smile finally breaking on my own face. Henry mentioned the letters, but I never thought, "Let me get my order book." We spent 2 hours picking things out. A real bed, a dining table, matching dishes, new pots and pans, linens, towels. He even bought a washstand with one of them fancy porcelain bowls. "You're spending a fortune, Sam," I warned him. "I don't care," he said. "It needs to be a real home." "What's her name?" "Ella. Ella Thompson." I smiled. "Well, Ella Thompson is a lucky woman. She's sending a telegram when she knows the date," he told me. "You bring her by soon as she's settled. I want to meet the woman who got you to buy matching dishes." He loaded up his wagon, his mind already 100 miles down the road. And I started to feel that old guilt turn into something else. Something like resolve. Every day I heard a new report. Sam scrubbing floors, whitewashing walls, patching the roof in the hot sun. His neighbor, Dutch Morrison, told me he found Sam up on the roof, hammering away. "You're gonna kill yourself before she gets here," Dutch had hollered up at him. "Can't have her sleeping under a leaky roof," Sam yelled back. "Can't have her marrying a dead man, neither," Dutch retorted. And then he climbed right up there to help him. They worked side by side, and Dutch told me later what they talked about. "What if she gets here," Dutch had asked him, "and decides you ain't what she was picturing?" Sam had gone real still. That was the fear we'd all been whispering about, the one I felt so ashamed of. And right then, hearing about the terror in that good man's heart, I knew I couldn't just be a witness anymore. I went into the back and started putting together the finest welcome basket this town had ever seen. My small, quiet apology. I reckon I'll carry the weight of my silence till my dying day. It all started the afternoon that telegram came for Sam. The yellow paper felt loud in my hand when I passed it to him. His face was a mask of hope and terror. But the real cold dread settled in my bones later, when I overheard Mr. Bradley at the general store, laughing with his boys about Sam's catalog bride. He said something cruel, something that curdled the air. And I just kept my mouth shut. I swept the porch, listening to their ugly laughter, and a bitter shame took root in me right then. That shame was the first brick in a wall I built around myself. A man can feel a storm coming, and those next 5 days felt like a thunderhead building on the horizon. Sam came to town for supplies, his eyes darting around like a spooked horse. He bought paint and fabric, things to make a house a home. He even sat for a haircut, fidgeting the whole time. The whole town was watching, whispering. But I saw what others missed. I saw Bradley's men leaning against porch posts, their eyes following Sam with a low, mean promise. Each time I saw it, the words I should have said stuck in my throat like dust, and my silence felt like a betrayal. The day she was due, I was working the depot, but my mind wasn't on my chores. Sam got there 2 hours ahead of schedule, wearing a suit that was choking the life out of him and pacing the platform boards. Tom, my boss, just shook his head. Mrs. Hensley came over purely to gawk, and even she could see the state he was in. When we finally heard the rumble of the coach, my own heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't just watching a man meet his bride. I was watching a good man stand at a crossroads, with wolves gathering in the shadows just out of sight. That stagecoach rolled in under a plume of Arizona dust, and a hush fell over the platform. My breath caught right along with Sam's. A businessman got off, then a woman with 2 little ones. I saw the light go out of Sam's eyes, and Lord, it hurt to see. Then she appeared in the doorway. She was smaller than I'd pictured, but stood tall. When her eyes found his across that dusty space, it was like the whole world stopped turning. Everything else, the noise, the crowd, my own fear, it all just faded away to nothing. "Sam?" That's all she said, her voice quiet but clear. His own voice was rough when he answered, "Ella." Then she did something that stunned us all. She dropped her bag and walked straight to him, closing the space like it was nothing. He caught her, and the way he held her, it was like he was holding onto his whole world. I saw then what Bradley and his boys couldn't see. This wasn't weakness. It was a strength I hadn't known existed, a courage that made my own cowardice feel sharp as a blade. Mrs. Hensley had to clear her throat loud as a gunshot to break the spell. Sam looked around, dazed. I helped load her big leather trunk and 2 cases onto his wagon, As he helped her up to the seat, she moved close to his side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Watching them ride out of town, a sliver of hope cut through my fear. Maybe they had a chance. But I knew Bradley, and that hope was a fragile thing. My silence felt like a heavy shadow stretching out behind their wagon. The first day I saw her, my stomach knotted up something fierce. He wanted her happy, he'd say. I saw the truth plain as day. For the first time in a long spell, he looked pleased with himself. I watched from my porch as they rode in, the silence between them heavy with things she didn't know. He kept looking at her like a prize he'd finally won, and I reckon he couldn't believe his luck. She looked at that big, empty land with such awe. "It's so big," I could almost hear her say. "The sky, the land, it's all bigger than I dreamed." He'd ask if it scared her. "No," she'd answer, surprised at her own grit. It feels like freedom." A cold dread washed over me. He was good at selling that lie. As the sun bled out across the horizon, he helped her down, his hand swallowing hers. It was a brand, not a welcome. "This is it," he gestured to the cabin. "Fixed it up for you. It ain't much, but—" She'd cut him off, taken in by the show. I knew she'd ask him to show her inside. He'd have put on a real performance for her. I could picture it all, having seen it before. Tears would well up in her eyes. "You did all this for me?" she'd ask, her voice thick. "I wanted you to have a real home," he'd say, the words smooth as worn leather. "Sam, this is more than I've had in 5 years. My room back there, I could touch both walls. This is a palace." Relief would wash over his face, the relief of a con man whose mark bought the whole story. "Really?" he'd press. "Really?" She'd trace the lines of the furniture, finger the curtains, touch the books he'd bought just to look the part. "This is perfect. This is more than perfect." He'd bring her trunk inside, sealing the deal. And when he'd come back, she'd be at that window, looking out at the land that was meant to be her whole world now. "Are you tired?" he'd ask. The journey was long. "I'm too keyed up," she'd admit. Every mile brought me closer. I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen. "And now?" he'd ask. She'd turn, her face serious. "I think the letters were real. I think I made the right choice, and I think—" She'd pause. "I think we should get married right away." My heart just broke for her. "Tomorrow!" He'd barely hide his eagerness. "Why wait? We've already waited. I didn't come all this way for appearances and separate beds. I came to be your wife." "The minister can do it tomorrow afternoon," Sam would say, his voice getting all rough with fake emotion. "I'll ride to town and arrange it all." "Good." She'd close the space between them, touching his face like he was some kind of saint. "I was so scared on the way here. Scared I'd imagined a man who wasn't real, that you'd be a disappointment. But standing here, I see I wasn't wrong. You're exactly who I thought you were." "I'm just a rancher," he'd say, covering her hand with his. "Dirt under my nails and no polish." "I don't want polish. I want honest. I want you." They'd stand there close, the evening light making it all look like a painting. He'd imagined this 1,000 times, all right, the moment his trap snapped shut. "I love you," he'd say, words he'd written and practiced. "Loved you since your first letter. I'll love you till I die." "I know," she'd whisper, poor girl. "And I love you the same." Then he'd kiss her, soft at first, then harder, claiming what he believed was his. It felt like coming home, she probably thought, not realizing the doors were locking behind her. When they'd pull apart, she'd laugh, a sound so full of joy it was like a knife in my own gut. "What's funny?" "Nothing's funny. Everything's perfect. I'm happy, Sam. So terribly, wonderfully happy." "Me too," he'd lie. "I was scared you'd get here and have regrets." "Never. Not for 1 second." She'd take his hand. "Now show me everything. Show me the horses, the land. I want to see my new home." They'd walk outside, and he'd point out the barn, his horses, the fences he'd mended, the well he dug 2 years ago. And she would ask a million questions, genuinely fascinated by the details of her gilded cage. She'd feed the horses from her pocket, laughing, looking at that endless land with pure wonder. "I can't wait to see the stars," she'd say as the sun finally gave up. "You wrote about 'em so often." "Give it an hour," Sam would promise. "You'll see just what I meant." They'd have a simple supper. Stew he'd made that morning, and she'd praise it like it was fit for a king. They'd talk about her long journey, about Philadelphia, about the life she thought she'd escaped. "Do you regret leaving?" Sam would ask her. "Not a bit. Sam, Philadelphia was never my home. It was just a place I was stuck. This..." She'd look around that cabin, out at the darkening land. "This already feels more like home than any place I've ever been." When night finally fell, they'd sit on the porch steps. The stars would pop out one by one, then 100, then 1,000, till the whole sky was on fire with them. She'd gasp. "Oh my God, told you," he'd say, all soft-like. "You didn't tell me this." "Sam, there are so many, I've never seen anything like it." They'd sit there in the starlight, her head on his shoulder, his arm holding her tight, and a false peace would settle over him. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a possession. "Tomorrow we get married," she'd say into the quiet. "Tomorrow we get married," Sam would agree. "And then? And then we build our life together. Every day, one day at a time." "That sounded perfect," she'd whisper. "It sounded like a sentence to me." He'd hold her close, looking up at the same stars that saw the last one's misery. They'd seen his loneliness, all right, the kind that festers and turns mean. From a lonely rancher to a man in love. More like from a patient spider to one with a fly in his web. Tomorrow they'd stand up before the whole town and make it official. But sitting there, I knew the real deal had been sealed months ago, in letters full of lies and sealed with false hope. They sat there for another hour before she finally gave in to sleep. He'd show her to the bedroom, then make his own bed on the floor, playing the gentleman for one last night. I knew he wouldn't sleep. He'd lie awake, listening to her breathe, feeling the weight of his victory. In less than 12 hours, she'd be his wife. The thought filled me with a terror so cold it spurred me into action. Before dawn, as he dressed to ride to town, I was already forming a plan. The minister, Reverend Caldwell, lived above the church and was not happy to be woken up. "Sam Whitaker, this better be good," he grumbled. "I need you to marry me today, this afternoon." The Reverend's annoyance turned to shock. "Today? Son, don't you need to court somebody first?" "Already did. Through letters. She arrived yesterday from Philadelphia. She's at my ranch and we want to get married." The Reverend looked him over for a long, hard second. "You're serious?" "Never been more serious." "All right then. Be at the church at 3. Bring the bride and 2 witnesses." Sam stopped at my general store next. I was already sweeping the steps, waiting for him. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, making note of his good suit and the anxious energy coming off him. "Getting married today, 3 o'clock at the church. Will you come? We need witnesses." The smile I gave him felt brittle enough to shatter. "Of course I'll come. Oh, Sam, I'm so happy for you." The words were poison in my mouth. "Does she need anything? A dress, something special?" "I don't know. I didn't think to ask." Men like him never do. "I'll bring some things by your place this morning. No bride should get married in a traveling dress." My chance, I was going in. Sam rode on home and I went inside to prepare. I helped him just a bit, my hand brushing his as he steadied the pot. The contact made my skin crawl. 3 o'clock at the church, he said. "Martha's bringing by some things if you want." "I want to look nice for you," Ella said, her voice so soft. "You already look perfect." He kissed her then, and I watched him pull away. "Tonight," he promised. "Tonight," she agreed, a blush on her cheeks. I showed up an hour later with Dutch Morrison, a man who knows a thing or two about trouble. "Brought you a dress," I announced, marching into that cabin like I belonged there. "It's not fancy, but it's white and pretty." I turned to Sam. Dutch here said he'd be your other witness. Figured somebody ought to make sure you go through with it, Dutch said, clapping Sam on the back. The next few hours were torture. I took Ella to the bedroom with the dress. While she was changing, my hands trembling, I pressed a folded piece of paper into her palm. "Read this before you do anything else," I whispered, my voice tight. "It's from Mary, the woman who was here before you." It all comes back to their wedding day. I was just a boy then, peeking through the dusty church window, and I remember thinking how Sam looked a foot taller standing up there. When Ella walked in, wearing my ma's borrowed dress with wildflowers in her hair, she was beautiful but looked as skittish as a newborn foal. Sam must have seen it too, 'cause he whispered something that made her let out this little laugh, a tiny sound in all that quiet. But I couldn't feel happy for them, not really. There was a knot of dread in my stomach from what I'd heard Chet Bradley planning behind the saloon just days earlier. I watched Sam say, "I do," his voice as steady as a rock, knowing full well a storm was coming to wash them away, and I didn't say a blessed thing. Didn't. Then Ella's voice rang out, clear and true, saying she'd take him too. The preacher declared them man and wife, and when Sam kissed her, Ma started crying happy tears, and my pa Dutch grinned like a fool. Just like that, they were Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker. I saw 'em sign the big book, my folks right there as witnesses. The whole thing took less time than a good Sunday sermon, but it felt like their whole world had just been born. Ma invited them to the town dance, but all they wanted was to go home. As their wagon rattled off toward the sunset, a stone of guilt settled deep in my gut. They were starting their life so full of hope, and I was letting 'em walk right into a snake's nest. That secret started to feel real heavy. I saw the lamp light up in their cabin from my bedroom window. I could just picture them in there, finally married, finally alone, both nervous and excited about everything to come. All their quiet hopes, her wanting to be a real partner, him wanting to build a life for her. It all seemed so fragile. I knew Chet Bradley wasn't just fixin' to steal their water. He wanted to poison the whole well of their happiness. That night, lying there in the dark, I felt lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. They were dreaming about their future, and I knew the ugly truth of what was waiting for them at sunrise. I should have told him. I should have warned them. But I was just a kid, and I was plain scared. And just like I knew it would, trouble came knocking. The very next morning, I saw Henry Mitchell ride over to their place, his face all long and sour. I was feeding the chickens and saw Sam stumble to the door. I couldn't make out the words, but I saw the fight go right out of Sam's shoulders. That creek was his ranch's lifeblood, and Bradley was aiming to cut its throat. Then Ella appeared beside him in her shawl. I saw the fear flicker across her face before it hardened into something like steel. After Henry left, Sam just sagged into a chair on his porch. Married for one day. They'd had one single day of peace, and disaster was already at the door. And it felt like my silence had invited it right on in, kneeling beside him, her hand on his arm. From that moment on, their little homestead was a hive of desperate work. I saw Sam lead away some of his best cattle for sale, his face carved from stone. My own pa gave him what money he could spare. I even saw him ride to town with his father's gold watch in his pocket, something I knew he treasured. They were selling off bits and pieces of their lives just for a chance to fight back. All the while, Ella was a rock, her chin held high, looking tougher than any man I knew. I heard she gave up her mother's jewelry, family keepsakes, without a second thought. She was sacrificing everything for their home, for Sam, and it just made my cowardice sting that much worse. Because it ain't worth a thing if you don't have a home. Every night that week, I saw their lamp burning long past midnight. Their shadows moved back and forth behind the curtains as they sifted through mountains of old papers. They were in it together. That much was clear. Then, one night, I saw a celebration through the window. Sam hugging Ella so tight he lifted her clear off the floor. She must have found it, the one thing that could save them. It was a glimmer of hope in a whole mess of darkness. As they rode out for Phoenix that Sunday, looking worn to the bone but determined, I prayed it would be enough. I knew a man like Bradley wouldn't be stopped by a simple piece of paper. My stomach was in knots worrying for them. I stayed behind, but I could picture that Phoenix courthouse like I was there, Sam and Ella looking like country mice in a city of cats. I'd seen Chet Bradley and his brothers in town before they left, acting all high and mighty with their fancy city lawyer. Bradley is the kind of bully who thinks owning more land makes him a bigger man, and he loves to buy up folks' misery for pennies on the dollar. I could just imagine him sneering at Sam, saying something ugly about Ella just to see Sam flinch. That's how he operates. He tries to gut you before the fight even starts. All day I just waited and prayed that their decency in that old yellowed paper would be enough to stand up against all of Bradley's money and spite. We heard the good news before they even got back. The judge had seen right through Bradley's scheme and sent him packing. The relief that washed over me was so strong I nearly buckled. The ranch was safe. But when I saw them ride back into town, that's when it happened. Bradley stepped right out in front of them, his face twisted with hate. "This ain't over," he growled, his voice low and mean. "You and your pretty wife better watch your backs." He wasn't talking about lawyers anymore. The way his eyes lingered on Ella made my blood run cold. And right then, something inside me broke. I had been a coward long enough. I ran all the way home, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Pa," I gasped, my voice shaking, "I gotta tell you something. Something I heard Mr. Bradley say before this all began." I recollect the day the trouble truly began. Saw 'em ride in from town, looking worn but like they'd won something. Then I saw that fella Bradley watching 'em from a distance, and a cold dread settled in my gut. I knew his kind. All smiles on the surface, all poison underneath. I kept to my porch, told myself it wasn't my business. 2 weeks on, I saw Sam chasing scattered cattle for 3 whole days after his fences got cut in the night. The anger coming off him was like heat off the prairie. I knew it was Bradley's work. A week later, the smell of death drifted over from his place. 2 good horses, gone. I watched him dig those graves on the hill, and the weight of my own silence felt heavier than a tombstone. I should have said something, should have rode over, but I just sat there, a coward in my rocking chair. What could I have done, though? I had no proof, just a bad feeling. I saw them talking that evening, the fire in Ella's eyes bright enough to see from my porch. She wasn't going to be run off. She was straightening his spine, you could just tell. Then he pulled her close, and I knew a decision had been made. It was a dangerous one. I saw him ride out the next morning, headed straight for Bradley's spread. My heart sank. That was a fool's errand, confronting a snake in his own pit. I nearly saddled my own horse to stop them, tell him it was a mistake. But what right did I have after keeping my mouth shut for so long? So I watched them go, praying they'd come back in one piece. Her sitting up there in that wagon, proud and scared all at once. That woman had more grit than most men I knew. It was a fine day to be checking fences, which is how I saw it all go down from the South Ridge. They pulled up, and Bradley came out onto his porch like a king, his brothers like vultures beside him. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the mocking curl of his lip. I saw Sam's jaw set hard. Then I saw Bradley's eyes drift to Ella, and the air got thick, even from a quarter-mile off. Sam launched himself off that wagon, pure fury. Before I could even blink, a pistol was out, aimed right at his heart. One of the brothers, cool as you please. It was over. Sam froze, every bit of fight draining right out of him. It was a terrible thing to witness, a good man brought so low by pure wickedness. I watched Ella's voice reach him, pull him back from the brink. He let go, stepped away. The shame and rage was a cloud around him as they drove off. Bradley stood there smirking, knowing he'd won. They rode past my property in that heavy silence, and I knew they understood. You can't fight that kind of poison head-on, not with fists. That evening I saw Sam ride out again, but this time he was heading for Dutch Morrison's place. The set of his shoulders was different. Not angry, but determined. He wasn't looking for a fight anymore. He was looking for allies. A small flicker of hope started in my chest. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe we could all stop being afraid together. She gave him that strength, I reckon. She showed him a smarter way. That flicker turned into a fire. When I heard Dutch was calling the meeting, I knew my time for porch sitting was over. I rode over the next night, my gut churning. It was a small thing, just showing up, but it felt like the bravest thing I'd done in years. I found Dutch's barn lit by lantern light, full of worried faces. Sam laid it all out, plain and simple. The fences, the horses, the threat against his wife. Then Tom Brennan spoke up about his own cattle. And Carlos and the Pattersons. The stories started coming, each one another nail in Bradley's coffin. It wasn't just Sam's word anymore. It was all of ours. My own voice, when I added what I'd seen, was shaky but clear. I was finally doing something right. I reckon the first time I knew something was truly wrong was the day Sam Whitaker found his fence cut. I told myself it was nothing, just drifters maybe, a convenient lie. Then we all gathered, our faces grim. Jack Patterson had lost 30 head of cattle. Carlos's entire hay store had been burned to the ground in July. My own well was spoiled for weeks on end. Sam finally asked the question we were all afraid to voice. Has anyone laid eyes on Bradley's men? The silence was heavy enough to crush a man. Tom finally spoke up, mentioning riders near his property, but it wasn't proof. That's not enough, Sam said, his voice raw with frustration. But Dutch, ever the calm one, said it was a place to start. We'd go see Marshal Hawkins as one. The following morning, 9 of us rode into Prescott, a posse of worried men. The marshal listened, his weathered face growing grimmer with every story. That's an awful lot of bad luck all at once, he noted. It's not luck, Sam stated flatly. It's Bradley. He's trying to scare us off our land. Proof? We had only our stories. Hawkins let out a long sigh, promising to ride out and ask some questions. But he told us that without hard evidence, his authority was limited. Carlos argued that by the time we had any, we'd all be ruined. We rode out of that office feeling lower than a snake's belly. I watched Sam head home, his shoulders slumped, and a familiar gut-twisting shame settled over me. Later, Dutch told me about Ella's idea, a trap, with her as the bait. My blood ran cold at the thought. It was a desperate, dangerous play. To put that woman who had more grit than any 2 men I knew directly in harm's way seemed like madness. This is crazy, I told Dutch. Everything's crazy right now, he replied, his jaw tight. At least this way we're fighting back. I couldn't argue with that. Ella, the woman from back east, had a core of steel. She planned it all. Sam would make a show of leaving on a long cattle drive, making their place look like an easy target. Sam fought it, of course, said he'd not use his wife as a lure. But she had it figured. Dutch and a few others would be hidden close. When Bradley's men came calling, the trap would be sprung. And if it failed, then we're no more ruined than we already are, she'd said. She took Sam's hands in hers and spelled it out. We couldn't keep living in fear, wondering what Bradley would take next. It was time to end it. I could see in Sam's face he knew she was right, much as he hated it. He made her swear to stay armed and to get out at the first sign of real danger, a promise I suspect they both knew was fragile. The next 2 days were a flurry of activity. Sam made a show of riding to town, talking loudly in the general store and the saloon about his big trip to Phoenix. Soon the entire territory was convinced Sam Whitaker was gone, leaving his new bride to fend for herself. You sure about this? I heard Dutch ask him the night before. No, Sam said, but we're doing it. Dutch told me where to be, hidden in the brush on a small rise overlooking the cabin. He and Jack would be in the barn. Sam would be in the root cellar, a ghost beneath the floorboards. If they're coming, it'll be tonight, Dutch guessed. I watched the lamplight in their window that night, my own courage feeling 1,000 miles away. In the pale light, I saw him kiss her goodbye, a long, deep kiss that spoke volumes of fear and love. No matter what, was the promise I saw pass between them. Then he vanished into the ground, and Ella sat by the table with a book, the rifle leaning beside her chair, a perfect picture of a woman alone, and unafraid. The hours crawled by. Midnight passed. My own limbs ached from staying still. Then, around 2 in the morning, I heard it, the soft tread of approaching horses. My heart hammered against my ribs. I saw Ella rise and move to the window. I could almost hear her sharp intake of breath. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady enough to cut glass. "Nobody you ought to worry about, Mrs. Whitaker," a rough voice answered, dripping with menace. "Your husband ain't here. We're just here to do what Mr. Bradley paid for." "I'm armed," she warned them. I heard their cruel laughter drift across the yard. "That's real precious. Now you put that gun down." My own hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my rifle. Every instinct I had screamed at me to fade back into the darkness, to disappear. But I stayed, rooted to the spot by shame. I heard Ella asking what Bradley wanted, her voice calm and measured, drawing them out. "The same thing he wants from all of you," the man said. "Your land. We're just here to light a fire under Whitaker, convince him to sell. A barn burning usually sends the right message." My blood ran cold. They were gonna torch the place. I heard boots scrape on the porch. Then Dutch's voice roared from the barn. "I'd stop right there if I were you." In the ensuing chaos, one of the thugs broke from the porch and ran blindly straight toward my hiding place. It was now or never. I stood up, my whole body trembling. My voice was a stranger's when it came out. "That's far enough." He skidded to a halt, his eyes wide at the sight of my leveled shotgun. Just then Sam erupted from the cellar. It was over. "You all heard it, right?" Ella asked, her voice finally breaking. "Every single word," Dutch said. "We ain't talking without a lawyer," one of the captured men snarled. "Too late," Sam said, his voice flat. "You already talked plenty." We tied him up and rode for town as the sun came up, our prisoners bundled in the back of a wagon. Marshal Hawkins was just opening his office. "What in blazes?" he asked, gawking at our cargo. "Proof," Sam said. "Hired by Bradley to burn my barn. Dutch and Jack and Silas here heard it all." Faced with a hangman's noose, one of the men confessed everything. He laid out Bradley's entire scheme of terror and intimidation, a 2-year campaign to drive us all out. "That's what I needed," Hawkins said, his face hard as granite. "We finally got the son of a bitch." We rode out to Bradley's ranch as a unified force. Hawkins, Sam, Dutch, and a half-dozen of us ranchers who'd suffered under his thumb. Bradley tried to flee, but his own horse threw him in the yard. "Chet Bradley, you are under arrest," Hawkins announced. "For what? I ain't done nothing," Bradley blustered. "Your men told a different story. Conspiracy, arson, extortion. Your time is up." Bradley's face turned a shade of purple. He glared at Sam with pure, uncut hatred. "You think this is over? I'll be out in a month, and then—" "And when you are," Sam said quietly, "I'll be waiting, and so will every other man you tried to break. You're done in this territory, Bradley." As they hauled him away, still spouting threats, I felt the heavy weight of the last few years begin to lift. "It's over," Dutch said, clapping Sam's back. "You did it." "No," Sam replied, looking at me, at the others. "We did it." On the way home, Ella was quiet. I saw Sam look over at her with concern. "What is it?" "We won," she said. "I know. But I was so scared last night, Sam. I didn't know if our plan would work, if I was about to lose everything." Her voice broke on the last word. Sam pulled their wagon to a stop right there in the road and just pulled her into his arms. I felt a pang of my own cowardice, thinking of how I'd almost let that happen. He told her she was the brave one, that she had saved them. "I just kept thinking about losing this life," she whispered. "You're not going to lose me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're stuck with me for the next 50 years. She let out a watery laugh. "Only 50? 60, 70, as long as they'll give us." They held each other, the crisis finally behind them, a future finally in front of them. When I got back to my own spread, I saw it with new eyes. The land we'd fought for, not just with traps and guns, but by finally standing as one. That night I saw the light on their porch and knew they were planning again, not for disaster, but for a life. And I felt hope take root. We were ranchers, we were neighbors, and we were stronger together than he ever was alone. We were fixing to go to the marshal together, a whole group of us. We had our proof. I saw him on their porch a few weeks later, after it was all done. Bradley was locked up tight. They were talking about a bigger barn, a garden. Simple things. The kind of things you can only plan when you ain't looking over your shoulder every minute. It was a peaceful sight. The home they'd fought for, quiet under the stars. He leaned over and kissed her, and I felt a pang of something. Not jealousy, but a deep respect. That right there, that was what we'd all stood up for. A man and his wife, building a life, free from fear. And I'd had a small part in it. It didn't wash away the guilt, not completely. But it was a start. So did I. A fella can get used to being alone, thinking that's his lot in life. Then I saw what they built. He took a chance on a piece of paper, and it brought him a woman made of iron and grace. Folks round here had their doubts, but she proved 'em all wrong. She stood by him when things got ugly. That kind of bravery, it's a rare thing. She'd cross a desert for him, I reckon, and he for her. It made a fella think. A coyote called out sounding lonesome, but I knew they didn't feel that way. They had their land and they had each other. It was a future they'd earned with blood, sweat, and a whole lot of courage. It was something to behold, something worth protecting. For everything. The comfort they shared, it was the real prize. I saw 'em through their window one night, just being together by the fire. It wasn't my place to disturb 'em, not after staying quiet for so long. But I couldn't just watch anymore. They were going to go to the church social to thank everyone. They were thriving. I'd been thinking on it for days, how to make things right in my own heart. So I went back to my place, picked the best vegetables from my wife's old garden, and put 'em in a basket. I walked over in the dark, quiet as a mouse, and left it on their porch. There was a little note tucked inside. It just said one word: neighbors. It was my promise, my apology, and my own small prayer that I could be half the man Sam Whitaker was. The weeks that followed were thick with tension. I'd hear Bradley's men talking, their words full of poison about running the homesteader and his wife off. Each day I kept quiet, the shame grew heavier. Then one night, sweeping up late, I heard them behind the saloon. They were laying out a plan to set a fire, to burn Sam and Ella out. And in that moment, the fear in me was finally burned away by something else, something fierce and hot. I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy that good, brave thing Sam and Ella were building. At the church social, folks were clapping Sam on the back, calling him a hero. They had no idea. They didn't know about the note I'd slipped under the sheriff's door. My hands shaking so bad the words were barely legible. I watched Ella get pulled into a circle of women, her smile finding its footing. When Sam led her onto the dance floor, clumsy at first, but then finding a rhythm that was all their own, I felt a weight lift from my soul. My note hadn't made me a hero, but it had made me a man. It was a small, quiet act in a world of loud threats, but it was mine. I remember watching them from my porch, just a stone's throw away. They were learning a new kind of language out there, one with their feet, finding a rhythm that was all their own. I even saw Sam crack a smile. "He's happy," I'd said to my wife, Martha. 2 weeks on, I was mending a fence when I heard Ella shout Sam's name, her voice stretched tighter than a new string. I saw him bolt from that barn, and I stood up straight, my hand shielding my eyes. She was pointing. Riders. My own stomach turned to lead. Bradley was locked up, but his kin were still a plague on this land. I watched him send her inside, saw her grab that rifle on her way. I should have grabbed mine and ridden over then. Instead, I just watched as 3 men rode up. When I saw it was Marshal Hawkins, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. But the look on his face told me the trouble was just starting. That old guilt started right there, a bitter seed in my chest. I heard the news when Hawkins stopped by my place on his way out. Bradley was gone, 12 hours ahead of him. I gave it a spell, then rode over to Sam's myself. Ella stood on the porch looking fragile as a ghost. "He'll be back for us," she'd said. And I knew she was right. Hawkins had offered a deputy, but we all knew the truth. Spread too thin. "How many you got?" I heard Sam ask him. "3," the marshal admitted. Not nearly enough. After Hawkins rode off, I just sat there on my horse for a minute, watching him stand in the yard under that heavy sky. It felt wrong to leave, but what good was an old man like me? "We were just getting right," I heard Ella whisper. Sam held her, promising to handle it, but I could see the cracks forming. That night, I couldn't sleep neither. I sat by my own window, looking towards their cabin, praying I wouldn't see the flicker of a torch. The waiting had begun, and it was a terrible, quiet thing. "What other way is there?" Sam had asked her. I overheard it one morning when I brought him some fresh eggs. Ella wanted to run. Can't say I blamed her. But Sam, he was rooted to that land. Letting Bradley run him off wasn't in his nature. Still, you could see the cost. 3 days crawled by, each one heavier than the last. I'd ride over, try to make small talk, but fear was the only thing growing on that ranch. It was poison in the air, making Sam's temper short and Ella's eyes haunted. On the 4th night, I saw it from my bedroom window, a flicker of movement down by their water trough. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was halfway to my boots when I saw Sam step out, rifle raised. He called out, his voice steady as a rock. The figure stood, and for a second I thought it was all over. But it wasn't Bradley. Even from my place, I could see it was just a boy, scared and weeping. I watched them talk, and a weight I didn't know I was carrying lifted just a little. That boy's visit was a warning. Sam was on my porch before the sun was even thinking about rising. He told me everything. Bradley, no, Chet, as the boy called him, was coming with 6 men, fixing to burn him out for murder. "Why tell me?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because this ain't right," Sam relayed the boy's words. "He's been drinking, getting mean. That boy, Todd, was leaving for good, but he couldn't live with that blood on his hands. He told Sam where they were holed up, a line shack 15 miles north. He told me not to face him alone," Sam finished, his eyes locking on mine. And in that moment, all the regret for my silence, for just watching, boiled over into something else, something hard and clear. I ran inside to tell Ella what Sam had told me. Her face went pale as milk. "We can't fight that many," she said. Sam's mind was already moving. "I'm riding to town," he said. "Gonna get Hawkins and every man who'll stand with us." That's when I finally found my voice. "You won't be riding alone," I told him, pulling on my coat. "Let's go." Ella insisted on going, and I saw in Sam's eyes he knew better than to argue with that woman's grit. We rode like the devil was on our heels, banging on doors in the dark. By noon, we had a dozen good men, myself included, all sworn in by the marshal. Hawkins laid out the plan on my kitchen table. We'd circle the ranch, pen 'em in. "Hope they give up easy," he said. "And if they don't?" Sam asked the question we were all thinking. "Then we do what has to be done." We rode back and took our posts. I settled in behind the well, my old rifle feeling heavy but right in my hands. The sun started to bleed across the horizon. My nerves were stretched taut, but for the first time in a long while the guilt was gone. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I reckon the first time I saw Bradley ride onto Sam's land, my gut told me to stay hid. I was just a kid, see, and my pa always said some fights ain't yours to pick, so I kept quiet. But that quiet's been eating at me ever since. I was up on the ridge when I saw 'em again today, 7 of 'em against the setting sun moving toward that little cabin. I heard Bradley's shout carry on the wind, telling Sam to come out. And when Sam did, rifle in hand, my stomach knotted up. I knew this was it. I was too far to help, too scared to move. A coward, plain and simple. Bradley just laughed when Sam offered a way out, a crazy, broke sound. He promised to burn it all down. Then his hand went up, and I saw his men go for their iron. Just as another man, the marshal, I guess, stepped out from the barn. The whole world just exploded in gunfire. I ducked behind a rock, peeking over as bullets chewed up the wood of Sam's cabin. I saw him drop to the porch and fire back, saw one of Bradley's boys tumble from his horse. Another fellow with a shotgun joined in, dropping one more. But through all that smoke and noise, my eyes were locked on Bradley. He spurred his horse right at the cabin, pistol aimed at the window where I knew Miss Ella was. My own heart just about stopped cold. I saw Sam's rifle flash, but Bradley was coming in too hot. The shot missed. Then Bradley fired, and glass flew everywhere, and I heard her scream. It was like watching a nightmare. Sam launched himself off that porch, a wildcat taking Bradley down. They hit the dirt in a tangle of limbs, wrestling for that gun. Bradley was a big man, full of pure hate. He got his hands around Sam's throat and started to squeeze. I couldn't breathe, neither. He was fixin' to die right there in his own yard, and I was just watching. Then Bradley's eyes went wide and his hands fell away. He just sort of collapsed sideways. And standing right there behind him was Miss Ella, holding that big rifle, a wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. "Nobody threatens my husband," I heard her say, her voice as steady as a rock in a storm. The rest of Bradley's crew saw him fall, saw they were outgunned, and threw their hands up fast enough. The marshal and his men moved in, clapping irons on him. The fight was done. I watched Sam get to his feet, choking for air. Miss Ella dropped that rifle and ran to him, her hands all over him, checking. I saw him ask if she was okay, if she was hurt. He just grabbed her and held on tight, not caring who was watching. "You saved my life," he said, plain as day. And I knew she'd saved his in more ways than one. The marshal, Hawkins, walked over and checked on Bradley. "Clean shot," he said. "Mrs. Whitaker, that was some mighty fine shooting." I could see her start to tremble then, now that it was all over. I was aiming for his shoulder," she stammered out. A chill went down my spine. "It don't matter," the marshal said. "She saved her husband." But I knew how words could get twisted, how a hero's act could be painted ugly by folks who weren't there. After they loaded up the bodies and the prisoners, Sam and Ella just sat on the porch steps in the growing dark. I saw her whisper something, saw her head fall against his shoulder. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the weight of them from all the way up on that ridge. He was holding her, telling her it was all right, telling her she was a hero, but I could see the ghost in her eyes from where I sat. That ghost stayed with me as the last wagon pulled away, leaving nothing but quiet and long shadows. The trauma of it all hadn't just settled on them. It was on the land itself, and deep in my own gut. I replayed it over and over, every shot, every shout. I thought about Miss Ella, who'd never hurt a fly, having to do what she did. And I thanked God she was alive, that they were both safe. But a new fear started to creep in, colder than the night air. I'd seen something in that chaos, a flicker of movement nobody else might have caught. The way Bradley had turned his gun toward her just a second before she fired. I was the only one who saw it clearly, and I hadn't said a word. The silence that had kept me safe now felt like a betrayal. My pa's voice echoed in my head. "Mind your own business, son." It was easier to stay hidden, to let the world sort itself out. But this wasn't some stranger's trouble. This was Sam and Ella, good people who'd always had a kind word for me. They were building a life out here, one fence post at a time, and Bradley tried to tear it all down. And Miss Ella had stopped him. What if my silence let someone else tear her down for it? The image of her standing there with that rifle, brave and terrified all at once, wouldn't leave me be. She was pregnant, I'd heard tell. They were going to have a family. That wasn't just their future Bradley had threatened. It was the future of a child, too. The risk of speaking up felt like a giant wall in front of me, but the guilt of staying quiet was starting to feel a whole lot bigger. I watched them from the ridge for a long time. The lights came on in the cabin, a warm little square against the dark. I could just make out their shapes moving inside. They were together, patching up the holes in their house and their hearts. They had fought for that life. They had stood their ground when everything was on the line. And what had I done? I'd hid behind a rock. The shame burned hotter than any bullet. They deserved to live in peace, to raise their family without a shadow of doubt hanging over what happened here tonight. They'd earned that peace with blood and courage. My fear wasn't worth more than her good name. It just wasn't. I knew what I had to do. The decision settled in me, heavy and solid as a stone. I saw the marshal mount his horse, getting ready to lead the last of his deputies off the property. It was now or never. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to melt back into the night, just to go home. But I thought of Sam's hand on Ella's back, the way he looked at her like she was the whole world. I thought of the choice she made. My choice was a whole lot simpler. I stood up, my legs shaking something fierce. I scrambled down from the rocks, dust and pebbles skittering ahead of me. The short walk across that yard felt like 100 miles, each step a battle. Ella and Sam saw me coming and stopped on the porch, their faces full of confusion. But I wasn't walking toward them. I was walking toward the law. I had to clear my throat twice before any sound came out. "Marshal?" He turned in his saddle, looking down at me. I saw it," I managed to say, my voice cracking like a dry twig. "I saw the whole thing." He just looked at me, waiting. And so I told him. I told him everything I saw from that ridge. About how Bradley had turned his pistol on Miss Ella right before she pulled the trigger. That it wasn't just self-defense for her husband. It was for her own life, too. The words tumbled out, clumsy and scared, but they were the truth. And with every one, the knot in my gut loosened just a little. When I was done, the marshal just nodded, slow-like. He looked over at Ella, then back at me. And in that moment, I knew I'd finally done something right. I hadn't fought, but I had spoken. And sometimes that's the fight you're called to.